Let's share. Okay. Hmm. Um, we were in the sixth packet, I believe, no? Or no, we're still in the fifth packet. That's why I'm getting thrown off. Here, let me check this out. This is where we're up to. Okay. So this was the last Shiloh that we saw. You find someone else's umbrella or someone else's coat. Okay. And that was our discussion, right? Yeah. So now we're up to, so this is why I sent out packet number 6, because we're almost done with packet number 5. And so the conclusion was that unless there's an issue of kavod habrios, unless it's like boots or a raincoat and there's torrential rain, you really should not be using someone else's property, because there's a real Choshen Mishpat issue here, because the guy may not be aware that he took the wrong coat or the wrong set of boots. And if that's the case, there's been no yeyush, there's been no active thought on his part to relinquish his item to you and to lend it to you. And therefore, the post can say that it would really be better for you not to use it. Now, that led to our next shaila, lishtamesh litzarech atzmo b'pikadon. Are you ever allowed to use something that was given to you for safekeeping to use it for personal use? So he basically said, no, that's not permitted either. If, however, it was cash, if it was tied up in an unusual way, that's what we had seen last time on Friday. That's proof that the owner does not want you to handle the cash at all, even if you're willing to replace it. But if he just gave you a stack of bills or something like that in an unsealed envelope, uh, then there's nothing wrong with you to borrow some of the cash during that interim, but you become chayiv on all onsin. You become liable for all mishaps that may occur, because you're a debtor. You're no longer just a shomer. So that was the last thing that we had seen, and now we're ready to go to the next packet. Okay, fine. Let's go back up all the way to the top. Okay, this is what we're up to. Simin Chaf. Kinuach yadav bebeged shel chavero keshechavero osakach ba'atzmo. Wiping your hands on your friend's garment, I guess. Doesn't have to be an actual garment, which sounds a little silly. Going over to your friend's shirt and say, "Here, do you mind?" No, so it's not exact. That's not exactly it. Beged could mean also a towel. Kishechavero osakach ba'atzma, when your friend is doing the same thing. She'ela, mi sheyadav hitlach lechu b'dam o b'shemen. If a person's hands get dirty with blood or oil, something, again, something schmutzik, ha'imutter lekaneach yadav bebeged shel chavero mibeli levakesh reshut. Am I allowed to wipe my hands on my friend's fabric without asking permission? Kagon sha'oto beged miluchlach b'shuman. He says, let's say that piece of fabric is already schmutzik. It's already filthy. Ubeged ze miyuad la'avodato l'kanech bo shemen o shuman. And I work in a place where they have special towels or special uh, um, um, other kinds of fabric that are meant to wipe your hands on. Like, let's say we're both working in an auto mechanic shop. Okay, he's got his workspace, I've got my workspace. Can I wipe my hands on his mechanic's rag? Umistama eno makbid im yihiye meluchlach gam bedam. So he wipes his hands with something that has got a lot of motor oil on it. He probably doesn't mind if I wipe, I cut myself. Can I wipe my hand on it? That's not a good idea, probably, right? Yeah, you don't want to. Yeah, recipe for infection, right? Odavka al shumaneno makbid shekach hi malachto v'tamid begadav milulachem b'shuman v'chelev. So here he's actually not talking about a mechanic. He's talking about, let's say you work at an abattoir or at a butcher shop or something like that, where you're dealing with animal grease or animal fat. He says, could we say that he doesn't mind because, or could you say, no, he specifically doesn't want, he's used to having this towel used for grease, but but he doesn't want there to be blood on this garment. So he actually says that it is a garment. It's like, let's say, an apron, a butcher's apron or overalls, where he does, he regularly wipes his hands from the grease, but it doesn't look good if it's got blood on it. So this is a very bizarre shaila. This must have existed as a real world shaila at some point for some people. So let's see. We'll have to see the source for this. Tshuva asur lekaneach bebeged chavero va'afilu beged chaver meluchlach b'shumin ubeged zeh miyud la'avodot. He says you're not allowed to wipe your hand on your friend's garment, even if it's already dirty with grease, and it's meant like a work overall. Even if we observe that the wearer of the garment wipes his hands regularly on it, because we also have to assume that he's the only one who wants to get it dirty with grease. Maybe he doesn't want other people to wipe their hands on it. Who gave this guy permission to clean himself with his friend's garment? Okay, so it's not something that you and I would run into on a regular kind of situation. Why is this something that he's bringing up? So let's take a look at some of the background. Makor Hadin. He says, this is from the Sefer Torah Lishma, and he brings proof from a Gemara in Zvachim. Le'inyan tfilas beged shenitma. If a garment becomes tameh during the times when we observe the laws of Tum and Tahara, you have to take the garment to a mikveh, immerse it in a mikveh, and that's how it becomes purified. Amar Rava pshitali shekesem shel dam al bigdo. He says, if the garment has a blood stain on it, you can't take it to the mikveh before you clean off the blood stain. Otherwise, the blood stain is going to act as a chatzitza, as an impediment between the water and the garment and the fabric. However, that's only if it's a regular garment. What if it's a butcher's overall? A butcher's apron, he doesn't mind if it's a little bloody. So therefore, chatzitza is dependent upon whether you mind or not. You probably are familiar with this somewhat because, you may have had a shaila at some point. My wife is going to the mikveh, and she's got nail polish on. She forgot to take off her nail polish. Is that considered a chatzitza or not? Right? So technically, you're not, the rabbi said you're not supposed to have even the smallest amount of anything that's going to create an impediment between the woman's skin and the water. However, if it's, the rabbis were lenient if it's something that's on the minority of her body and she doesn't mind that it's there. So even though we're machmir, lechatchila, that even that kind of impediment she should not have on her body. And that's why, we carefully, the mikvah lady carefully examines her to make sure there's no dirt and there's nothing underneath the nails and things like that. But that's a chumrah, because technically, if she's got something that doesn't bother her, that's on the minority of her body, that doesn't really create a problem. The tefillah is still kosher. So lichatchila, she's got to remove all of her nail polish. But b'di'evet, if she went to the mikveh and there was a little bit of nail polish, or even if her nails were just freshly painted and she forgot she was going to the mikveh, so we can be lenient and say that the mikveh, the tefillah was still kosher. That the principle is that if it's on a minority of anything that's going to the mikveh, in this case, it's a piece of fabric, it's an article of clothing. If it's on, if the blockage or the impediment, like a blood stain or is only on a minority of the garment, and you don't mind it being there, so then it's still kosher. It's like another example of where you would find this is, let's say you want to toivel a pot in the mikveh, and the pot has a label on it, because a lot of pots have labels, when they sell them. So you're supposed to remove the labels, right? But what if it's the kind of label that is meant to stay on? Maybe it's a metal label, or maybe it's something that people just keep on this particular kind of, maybe it's a glass container that has some kind of, authentic crystal label that people would keep on. So then, or measuring, that's painted on, right? So those are things you don't mind. You actually may want that label or that inscription or paint to be
part of the pot.
right. So a graduated thing, that's part of the pot, but but let's say it's a label that you want to remain, so you don't have to remove it, or if you don't mind that it's there, you don't care. It could go either way. You don't have to remove that label.
Yeah, we have sometimes when we're towing stuff here for sure, we have like made in so and so on the bottom. We retotaled them by missing the fact that when we did it the first time.
Yeah, because those are usually labels that you want to remove. You don't want them
Right,
there.
and then it's not necessary to the pot itself. It's just something that you missed.
That's right. That's right.
We actually
then you're supposed to retoivel.
I don't
But
know if we retotaled with a bracha. I don't remember. Are you supposed to retotal with a bracha?
Well, that's the question. It could be that you're not chayiv because it doesn't bother you one way or the other. If it doesn't bother you one way or the other, then
Is it an issue of bothering or issue of being a chatzitza?
Well, that's the point. Chatzitza is only a problem when it bothers you. If it doesn't
bother the Mashiach, it didn't bother anybody else.
No, I'm saying the utility of the utensil having a label on, is that something that most people would want to keep on? It doesn't, they don't care one way or the other. So that's the thing.
Rabbi,
Generally machmir with these kinds of things whenever possible. Yes, Shmuel.
yeah, someone who in an earlier life had a tattoo and doesn't like it anymore. It stuck with them.
That would not be considered a chatzitza because it's actually part of his skin. It's like the skin has been dyed, so you don't have to remove your skin in order for the tefillah to be kosher.
Okay.
So that's
questions with taharas, with
what kind of questions?
People would ask, like, you want to do a tahara on someone? Of course
you can. Of course you can. Sure.
Would you be able to put a percentage on like 5%, 1%? What's a small percentage?
As long as it's less than 50%, that's covered. Yeah. And you don't mind, then technically the tefillah is still kosher. So therefore the Gemara in Zvachim says that if it's a butcher's apron that's going to the mikveh and it has a blood stain on it, it's still a kosher tefillah. He says, because the butcher doesn't care if his apron is blood stained. V'chein shumin al bigdo, Harei ze chotzeitz le'inyan tefila, ve'im moicher shmonim eino chotzeitz. Similarly, if there's grease on a person's garment, you have to remove the grease, before you can take it to the mikveh, because that's a chatzitza, unless he's a grease merchant, like he's a schmaltz merchant. He deals in that's right, in gribbinus. Yeah, he's a gribbinus salesman. So then, so then that kind of grease he's used to having that on his apron, and therefore it's not a chatzitza. Va'alzeh shoal od Rava sham misha hayu kismei dam u'revav al bigdo mahu. So then Rava asks seemingly the same question again. If a person has a blood stain or a grease stain on his garment, what is the halacha? V'hagemara sham to'al she'elaso shel Rava ma makom l'she'ela zu shaharei im tabachu teitze lo she'ish kan chatzitza mishum revav shaharei ein hatabach rogil bekach v'imocher hu shmonim teitze lo she'ish kan chatzitza mishum dam v'chulei. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. It depends on his profession. If he's a butcher, then a blood stain is not a problem, but a grease stain is. And if he's a schmaltz merchant, so then the schmaltz is not a chatzitz and the blood stain is. So umeshiva hagamara al zeh shelo nitzracha she'ilazu shel Rava ba'adam she'osa zeh v'zeh. So the Gemara says, well, what if a person engages in both? Like he works right near an abattoir, so he's got animal fats and he sells cuts of meat. So he's got blood stains and grease all over his garments. Shehu gam tavach v'gam moicher revav v'asheila hi im davka ala chatzitza echas en adam makbid aval shtayim makbid v'harezu chatzitza. So do we say that a person is only makbid on one type of or that he's not makbid, he doesn't mind having one kind of stain, but even a guy who does both doesn't want to have both stains on or not? Oh, kamo she'eno makbid al chatzitza echas gam al shtayim eno makbid v'siyama hagemara she'ela zu b'teiko. And or is it possible that maybe even a person who's engaged in both of these dirty jobs would mind if both of these stains were on his garment? And the Gemara says we're not really sure. So Upirish Rashi Atarti Kapid, and Rashi, in explaining this Gemara, says that Afal Gav de Rogel B'Taravayu Genaihu Lo Sheyerou Shneim Al Bigdo. In other words, Rashi says a guy may be a merchant who deals with two kinds of dirty commodities or things that cause stains, but maybe he still doesn't want to be seen with both of those kinds of stains on his garment. Or do we say no, he doesn't mind because he's getting, that's his profession. Ve'al pi zeh kasef b'torah lishma nimtza behecha de'avid beis malachos elu va'oso habeged hayimaluchlach b'shuman im kol zeh keven de'lo hayimaluchlach b'dam dilma kapid zeh. So therefore, the Sefer Torah Lishma writes as follows: if a guy does engage in both, in a dirty profession, but he's only got grease on his garment, but doesn't have blood on his garment, maybe it's because even though he deals with things that can sometimes get bloody, he doesn't want to get blood on his apron. And wouldn't want two types of dirty stains to be on his garment. He only doesn't mind if one kind of dirty stain. Nami aser, kevin dekapid al halich l'shos and lo acherim. And he goes even further and he says, and maybe he only doesn't mind if he's the one who wipes his hands on his apron, but he's not interested in having other people wipe their hands on their apron. And just like it would create a chatzitza because it bothers him, so too there's a problem of geneva. If I stain your garment with something that it's already stained by, but I don't want your stain, I only want my stains. In other words, some people can be like that, just like we don't know.
So that's the bottom line point.
Right, that is the bottom line point. Maybe something that's filled with stains, but they're my stains. Like I don't want your stains, you know. So that's the that's the question. So anyway, he goes a little bit further into this discussion. I guess already started going down this rabbit hole. We might as well finish it. He says, "V'yesh lahayer delichora amai haTorah lishma lo hevi ra'ime hagemar b'bava mitzia." He says we should really ask the question: what about the Gemara in Bava Mitzia? Da'amrinan hasam Mar Zutra Chasida igniv le casa de kaspa me ushpiza. So that Mar Zutra used to stay at an inn. And one day his innkeeper's golden goblet, a silver goblet, was stolen. Chazya lahu bar beirav demashi yade benagiv beglima de chavre. And he noticed that there was one of his rabbinic colleagues who used to wipe his hands on his friend's shirt. Amar hainu haidelo ichbas le'amamone de chavre kafte va'ode ein sham. That guy must be the Ganav. In other words, he did that was his sleuthing work, right? He said, anyone who is so anyone who's so coarse that they would wipe their hands on someone else's shirt shows that they don't care about another person's property. And so he's the Ganav. He went over to him, interrogated him, and the guy finally broke under the pressure. Okay? And he admitted that he had stolen the silver goblet. Chazinan mehacha. Kol shehu menagev yado bebeged chaver lelo reshuso, af she'eno malach lecho lo bedam velo v'chulei, havi kegezel kol shehu v'aser. Why don't you infer from that Gemara that anyone who wipes his hands on his friend's garment, even if it's not dirty, even if he's not going to dirty his friend's garment, let's say I just, I'm looking for a towel and I can't find one. And I noticed that in the coat room right next door to the washing station, there's a guy left his jacket. So I wiped my hands on the guy's jacket. Well, that's actually, not only is it uncouth, but it's a sign that you don't care about other people's property. And therefore you're under suspicion. But why doesn't the Sefer Torah Lishma bring that as proof that you're not allowed to wipe your hands on someone else's garment? V'yeshlomer mehasam lekarayim mishum demari hasam b'talmud chacham umakbid af she'en sham lo kesam v'lo b'chuli al begadav kibid sheb'choleis rotzish begadav yunikiyim. It could be that in that case we're dealing with talmidei chachamim, and the Gemara says that a talmid chacham who has even the smallest stain on his garment is chayiv misa, because talmidei chachamim have to be impeccably clean, right? So. And that's a really important halacha. And maybe that's the reason why Mar Zutra's deductive reasoning worked, but only in that case. And maybe when you're dealing with people who are blue-collar workers, maybe they don't mind if there are multiple types of stains on their garments. And that's why he only brought a raya from the Gemara in Zvachim, but not from the Gemara in Bava Metzia.
So the rabbi, if you take that, that angle that the rabbi identified this person because they didn't take care of other people's property.
Yeah.
Then if you put that into modern terms, this people who drop litter would fall into the same into a similar type of error. I mean, if they're not concerned about what happens with just rubbish thrown on the ground as opposed to putting it in the bin. I mean, how far does it?
How far do you extend it?
Right.
I'm not so sure if you can extend it that way, Doug, because when a person litters, he's showing a certain disregard for public property, but you can't necessarily infer that he's going to show a disregard to an individual's property. Look, let's face it. I've seen people in my neighborhood dump garbage or be reckless with garbage. You probably have also.
It's just so going to the Mayor Sharon, it's repulsive. They throw garbage everywhere in greedy areas. You see this.
Is that picked up, or
That's
is it because
not covered areas like what is that? That's under some other. But it happens.
I guess it depends. If they're showing disregard to individuals' property, let's say they're dumping some kind of liquid waste on someone else's wall. So that's prohibited, and that's a sign that they don't care about others' property. I'm not so sure if you can make the same application if a person is reckless with garbage. But you're right. In general, it's not that we're not saying that there's a halachic principle here, but you can infer if someone is reckless in one area, there's a good chance they're going to be reckless in another.
Talking about personality traits.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So, at what point does that personality trait show itself or not show itself?
Correct. That's ultimately the question, right? Oh. Okay. So, in the final psak, he says that when there is if a person has blood or grease stains on his hand, is that considered a chatzitza? So the Magen Avram paskins that when it comes to a woman's tevila to go to mikvah, that is something that we are machmir about. And if she goes to mikvah and afterwards discovered that she had a blood stain on her hand, then she would have to go and re-immerse. But ule'inyan and tilas yadayim, Aslinan Lakula. But for Natilas Yadayim, which is a rabbinic law, not a biblical law, we are more lenient and we will be more makel. Anyway, that was the reason for this halacha, just to see how the bottom line is you're not allowed to wipe your hands on someone else's garment, even if the guy himself does that same kind of thing with his own garments.
And if what you do you have to pay? Like if you have to pay for dry cleaning or washing or?
Oh, so that's an interesting shaila. Would you have to pay? It could be you don't have to pay because you could say you were going to have to get this thing cleaned anyway.
What's the punny? Like, what is the Avera?
The it's a form of Geneva. It's a form of Geneva.
But how do you compensate? Like, how do you?
So here, I don't think there would be compensation.
What happens if you can't get it staying off? If it's grease, you can't get off. For the.
So it all depends. Like if it was a clean garment and you wiped your greasy hands on his thing, so then if you've ruined it, you got to pay for it. Or you got to pay for the dry cleaning. But here the case was specifically the reason why the guy rationalized that he could wipe his greasy hands on it is because it's filled with grease. The guy, it's like a butcher's apron or something like that, Okay. Because grease monkey. That's you see, the guy's a grease monkey anyway. Okay. You ever remember
That term.
that term just popped in my head, yeah.
Grease job.
Yeah.
They go around and grease all the bearings. That's what they do.
All the what?
The bearings.
The bearings.
Bearings on machines, so they need grease to keep the ball racing.
Okay.
In seal. And if they overfill it, then the bearings get solid and they fail. And if they underfill it, then they run too hot.
Wow, isn't that
So
interesting?
It's quite it is, well, was, now you have sealed bearings, you don't see it so much, but it's a specialty. But the guys were specialty in steam engines and mechanical things. The grease monkey was quite a specialized job.
Right, and so it wasn't meant
That's
derogatorily.
derogatory at all. That's what
I
they
was
did.
thinking
They
a
piled grease,
derogatory term.
the grease pump, they piled grease through a tube into the bearing. So each bearing had its own nipple on it.
Yeah.
No,
No,
monkey
grease monkey was a derogatory term.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really?
he's a grease monkey.
Yeah. No, a grease monkey was an actual person.
Yeah, where did you get the word monkey from?
Because they had to climb up all the machine, the bearings all over the machine. So they had to climb up all over the machine to get it.
That's in New Zealand and all. That's not over here. United States, those are derogatory.
Uneducated to educated, I understand.
Grease monkey. Where'd that come from? I just remember as a kid.
Yeah, right.
Grease monkey.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
No, that it is interesting.
Coming up there.
Okay.
That's what I'm taking away from today's. show.
Okay.
Forget about wiping your hands.
Let someone else do this.
Okay, next Shaila. We'll just get started. You know what? It's already 6:40. We'll hold it here And we'll start the next Shiloh tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem. Okay, have a great